You are listening to Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea. Funny how just when you think life can't possibly get any worse, it suddenly does.
Hi there, this is Jeff. I'm with my friend Bryan, and we'll be talking about The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in all its forms. But before we do that, let's listen to a message from one of our proud sponsors.
This episode of the Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea podcast is brought to you by the Campaign to Save the Humans. We bid you welcome.
Hey Bryan, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Jeff. How are you?
You know, I think I feel good about it.
Oh, boy.
And I actually feel good about this second new to me radio series that I've listened to now. So this is, again, something I got to hear for the first time.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And there's a lot of little changes that I was very happy with.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, and I was quite surprised listening to this, and I have to applaud you on how you have now created a perfect outro for our story.
Right. What I found interesting about this episode is that it's only 4 parts, where the previous 2 phases were 6 parts. So I didn't think they'd be able to get the whole story in there, but they did, and then some.
Oh, yeah, they did the same kind of approach in the previous BBC audio casts, where they bring some of the past history back as well as moving the story forward. They did bring in quite a few of the historical events that happened.
Yes, absolutely. When there were things in the book that I liked, and they did a good job presenting those, they were genius.
Mm-hmm.
When they made these little changes about things in the book that bothered me, and their little change totally took away everything that bothered me, they were genius.
I noticed that exact same thing, that our questionable answers were taken seriously in this version, this audio version of the story.
Yes, they were. And then, when they put in things that totally negated things that were previously established, they are idiots and don't know what they're doing. Except, of course, for those previously mentioned things that I talked about, where they got it right.
It's quite interesting, and as you say, surprising in that the entire listen takes about, 2 hours and 10 minutes or so?
Yeah, something like that.
And the book itself is a shorter book, shorter than the previous ones.
Yes.
But I was surprised and pleased at the way this program came about.
Yeah, me too. And about the whole Hitchhiker series in general, in all of its different parts, I've come to a new way of approaching it to reconcile things in my mind, and it solves all the problems with continuity.
Okay.
Because we're dealing here with the multiverse,
Mm-hmm.
I used to just think that the books and the radio series were their own universes.
Right.
Now, each individual book is its own universe. And each individual radio series is its own universe.
I like that approach.
Even break it down to each episode of the radio series could be its own. And then, to quote the man who rules the universe, I only decide about my universe.
Right.
My universe is my eyes and my ears. Anything else is hearsay. So, every person reading or listening to or watching it's their own universe.
Right.
So every interpretation is correct
Mm-hmm.
in the vast, vast multiverse.
Yes.
So remember that when we get to the end and I make you really, really mad.
Oh, I don't think you'll make me mad. I really don't. Because there's some questions that are, I mean, I feel like we're jumping forward, and, that's the nature of what this book and the nature of who we are. But there's some questions that are answered in the radio series here, which are not as satisfying as they are in the book. So, like you say, because you and I have had such an experience with all this material before, I truly, when I'm thinking about it, I have a hard time separating all of the different aspects of it from each individual telling. And therefore,
Yes.
to me, it's a conglomeration. And we have to respect the author's intent when he produces this output, because all of this output, or I can't say all of it, most of the output that we've reviewed has been his. And he had
Correct.
the vision.
But this wasn't his. This
Yes.
was other people reading something, being confused, and going, what could he have meant? And they make these little changes.
Right,
So-
right. So we have to be careful, as you say, not to attribute it to Adams, but at
Correct.
least it does excite and entertain the intended audience, as you say.
True. All right, so we'll start with part 1. And right off the bat, they piss me off.
How come I never anticipated that, Jeff?
In secondary phase,
Mhm.
it was clearly stated by Ford that destroying planets was done away with centuries ago.
Right.
They also established that destroying the Earth for a bypass was a ruse, and it was really being destroyed by the psychologists in this universe because they didn't want the ultimate answer to the ultimate question to be known.
Correct.
Vogon Jeltz was reporting directly to Gag Hellfront, who ordered the destruction of the Earth, and depending on which version you listen to, Zaphod was involved in that decision as well.
Correct.
So the Earth being in the way and making a bypass and destroying it was not the reason it was being destroyed.
Correct.
And this episode starts out with Prostetnik Vogon Jeltz destroying another planet to make way for a bypass,
Exactly.
which they don't do anymore. And they stated that. So that was a different universe.
Right.
In this universe, they still destroy planets.
Oh, yeah. Quite confusing. But the one thing I did find interesting, and I don't know why I didn't notice it before, but when they were talking about Vogon, Prostetnik Vogon Jeltz, I didn't associate Prostetnik as being a status or class in the original books. I always thought it was part of his first name, But Prostetnik is a class or an officer in the Vogon language.
Yes, I have read it both ways and haven't decided which way I thought was the best way. You hear the cat?
And now you have an editor telling you not to do that? I heard that cat in the background.
Well, the cat was outside the door meowing, so I thought I'll let her in and then she'll stop. It just got louder.
Oh, these editors, they have a lot to say, don't they?
They do. Anyway, in all the times I've read it and listened to it, I have flipped back and forth on whether it's part of his first name or if it's a designation.
Right.
And I think I've leaned kind of towards the designation because I think they've talked about, I don't know, for some reason I think I've heard of another Prostetnik, or they've said something like the Prostetniks.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that was the movie or something like that. So that's, I think, when it solidified in my mind that it was a class or a rank.
Right.
But he's being reprimanded.
Right.
Because the Earth is back.
Mm-hmm.
He was supposed to destroy it.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of liked that they're doing... All these Volcons have these deep, gruff, gravelly, very traditional male voices.
Mm-hmm.
And during the destruction of the other planet, one of the Vogons asked Jeltz if planet should be vaporized or turned into rubble. And Vogon Jeltz replied, "Lady's choice." So
Yeah, they pulled that joke off a couple times in this book.
Yeah. So I don't know.
Or
It
in
made
this
me laugh
story,
every
yeah.
time.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know if it's a lady or if it's a jibe, or jab.
And that's what's funny. I think it's the former, but I don't really know. You're right. But I do like the comment that they make about bureaucracy here. I don't know if you've reached that point in your conversation or not, but they make the point that they say bureaucracy is a parasite that preys on free thought and suffocates free spirit.
Yes, definitely.
And I like that.
Yes. So then they destroy the planet, and then we have a new version of Far Out in the Uncharted Backwaters, where they made a tiny little change
Yes.
that totally flipped everything on its head.
Yep.
So now, in the part that states orbiting this at a distance of roughly 92 million miles, it says, was once an utterly insignificant planet.
Right.
That totally changes this from a prequel, like I told you I expected when reading the book,
Uh-huh.
to a continuation of the story.
Right.
So now there's a timeline that we can follow. When he went back to the exact same beginning, it was like, oh, we've rewound. None of this has happened yet. We're going to get this day in the life.
Mhm.
But nope, now it's perfectly clear. Oh, and then they updated digital watches to novelty ringtones.
Yeah, exactly.
Which, really not bad.
Sorry.
Speaking
Forgot to
of
put that on
novelty
silent.
ringtones.
Hold on. I got to get this call.
That couldn't have come at a better time.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on.
So I think that substituting novelty ringtones for digital watches is pretty darn appropriate. It's as close to a good swap as that you could come in this day and age.
Yeah, yep. Even the folks with cell phones set on vibrate are miserable people, right?
That's right. Yeah. Which now, if you want to talk about that joke, did that negate the joke? I mean, the original text
Mm-hmm.
was that digital watches were a neat idea, even the ones with digital watches. And then they changed it to novelty ringtones, but they didn't keep novelty ringtones. They changed it to set on vibrate. Does that change the joke? Because it's a different group of people.
Right, it is. It is. And in theory, what is it, 3 years later? I don't know. What did take 3 years for the cell phone to be adopted? That's for sure. It took much longer.
Well, actually, this isn't 3 years after the first book. This is the radio series.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I meant
so this is
storyline wise. Doesn't he return to his home
correct.
now? It's been like 3 years. Is that what he estimated time wise locally?
Yeah, that or 8. I don't remember. It's
Okay.
In the book it was 8. I don't remember what they said here, but it's
Okay,
all
sorry.
over the board.
All right.
And it was only a couple of months on Earth though, and that's where it gets confusing. Is his timeline and the length of time that actually passed on Earth
Right.
is quite different.
It is.
Oh, it was 6 months in the book. I think it was a year in this.
Okay.
There was a question that I kept having while reading the book, and I never put it in our questionable answers, and then they answered it here.
Okay.
And I think it would have been a hysterical answer if you would have answered it before realizing that it was the truth, because I don't think this is in the book, about how he survived on $30 Altarian a day. It's like, how has he survived? What has he been doing for money?
Right.
It's like, Arthur has been out there for years.
Mhm.
How's he paying his way? He doesn't have Ford with him anymore. He's got to be doing something, and we got to learn
Yep.
that what's he doing? He is
giving away body
selling,
parts.
selling all the blood, sperm, and hair cuttings he could survive without.
Yep. Well, prior to that period when Earth was reintroduced, he was a unique character in the universe.
Yes. Yeah, he would be a rarity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then in this version, they inserted a little piece that we are told that Arthur saw the new updated guide that had the greatly expanded entry on the Earth.
Right.
And so that's why he decided to go back.
Yes. That was one of those little I won't call it a glitch, but one of those little changes that made the story more entertaining. And, it does answer questions that we had when we were looking at or reading the original source material.
Yes.
And the other thing that I noticed that, you're just talking about Arthur. He's just coming down on the planet. Of course, they talk about it in the book that he's getting out of a spaceship. But in this audio version, he turns to them and says, "Oh, that's an excellent ship for a teaser." So
yes, yeah.
So he's
bring
returning.
Back teaser.
Yep. So he's returning to the planet on a teaser, which I thought was fun. I didn't quite get why they had the language like unintelligible for us, but I guess Arthur still had the babelfish, so he understood exactly what the guy was saying.
Right. He would translate for us.
Mm-hmm.
When you'd hear the gibberish, his response would basically replay the comment.
Right. Which was fun.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And the other thing I thought was interesting, and I thought you'd appreciate it, is so they say that Arthur doesn't really know why the Earth has returned, and he's decided to ignore it for the time being.
Yes, right. Yes, like all of us. like everybody who's reading this or listening to it, we're just gonna ignore this for a little while. We come to the part where they cut to Ford, and he's in that bar with the bird that lists the contact information of the local hitmen,
right,
with the disembodied arm as a bouncer.
And that was funny in audio. I mean, they did a beautiful job with that whole scene.
Yes. However, they explained my favorite joke.
Mm-hmm.
And when you explain a joke, you ruin a joke. But I guess they were afraid people weren't going to get the joke.
Right.
So they explained it. And it's like, well, why did you ruin it? And that was all eyes were on Ford.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are on stalks.
Right.
And then he goes, literally. It's like, you don't need literally. You don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
What I liked in that bar scene is how much you can pack into an audio presentation,
right,
that you can't put in the written page.
Right, exactly.
Because things can happen simultaneously. So the whole time Ford is having this conversation with the bartender,
right,
the bird is in the background yelling out numbers for local hitmen.
Right.
So I wrote down one of the names that he yelled out and one of the numbers.
Okay.
So one of the names was Eviscerate Eviscerator. That was the name of a hitman. And one of the numbers was 0800 whack. So you're trying to listen to Ford in the conversation, but then in the background, you've got all this other stuff happening that you want to listen to. So you have to keep going back and re-listening. Okay, this time I'm just going to listen to the background. And this time I'm going to listen to Ford.
Mm-hmm.
And what I did not like about this version of the scene is that the bartender tells Ford that he knows his face and he's pulled this before.
Right.
That means that the write-up in the guide has already been done for them. So he's not going to get out of it with writing them up in the guide because they already have a write-up. So I didn't like that they had the bartender recognize him. Do you have any idea why he would have done that?
No, you're right. It kind of pulls it away from the dynamic. Although, if you think about Facebook and the media culture that we live in now, it's just not one feed, one bit of feedback that's going to get you there. It's a avalanche of feedback, the viral part. So
correct.
today you wouldn't want just one person reviewing your place. You'd want multiple. That's the only that was my way of ignoring it for the time being.
Right.
I could make an answer that fit the situation.
Yes. And we have to do that a lot with all of these books
Yes.
and radio series.
Right. And then Ford makes the joke with the hooker about the bass player that got thrown out the window. And at one point, a dead bass player gets thrown out the window, and they're remarking about the dead bass player. And Ford said, you know the difference between a dead dog on the highway and a dead bass player on the highway? And he says, there's skid marks in front of the dog.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Oh, bass players were a dime a dozen in the dog bar.
Yes, they are. Yes.
And then Ford goes on to say to the hooker that when she asks him whether he's rich, and he says, well, I'm not rich now, but I will be because I'm owed 15 years back pay. And she said, oh, you work on your back too?
I love that line. That was like, wow, that was clever. That one worked. But the other joke he told that I liked so much in the book, they changed it again, and I don't know the reason that they thought they needed to change it, which is when she asked him if he wanted a good time. Hey, do you want to have a good time?
Yeah.
And instead of saying, I'm already having one, he just says, thanks, I just had one.
Right.
And it's like, no, see, he's still happy. He is still just all overjoyed. And here it kind of ended. So I wish they'd have kept the original joke.
Yeah, me too.
Then, this is my favorite thing in the whole show. And it has to do with talking with the prostitute. Surprise. Okay. As Ford is looking at the new entry in the guide for Earth, the prostitute that tells people it is okay to be rich is at another vehicle talking to somebody. Right. And you can hear her conversation in the background.
Yes.
And she's talking about a golden handshake.
Right.
It's also referred to as a golden parachute, and it's
right.
a contractual agreement that's made by top executives, so they get a whole lot of money when they get fired.
Right.
But if there was anything that was a business term that sounds more like something on a prostitute's, let's just call it a menu, than a golden handshake, I cannot think of what it is.
Oh, I thought that was a great scene. Another question that's answered right here near the end of this particular chapter. Well, I'll say answered because it kind of implies something that we don't know is,
okay.
When we're introduced to Fenny, we're told that she was a marine biologist.
Oh, okay, right.
I thought that was interesting because, of course, you had asked me in the questionable answers, why did Fenny get a bowl and why is Fenny important? We still don't know that answer, but at least if she's a marine biologist, she would have been recognized by the dolphins.
Yes, she would have. Yes. Yeah, I guess it's jumped out at me that it was different, but I didn't really plug it in the way you've just done that for me.
What, am I going to be standing on the street corner next?
Thank you for the golden handshake.
Oh my gosh. And I wanted to talk about a fire hydrant.
Yeah.
And what's funny about the fire hydrant, of course, is in the end they're talking, the out credits of this particular episode. They're talking about a sign that's hung up looking for a new bird outside of the Pink Dog Bar above the fire hydrant. It said a new bird needed with knowledge of local hitmen vitally necessary.
Correct. Yes.
Because the bartender shoots him in earlier scene.
When you're listening to this, there's a couple of different stories. There's the Ford story and the Arthur story, and they flip back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So as we're telling this, we go right past other things. We got to kind of go back in time. So I'm going to jump back in time to Arthur. when he's looking for a ride in the rain. And I thought it was really clever to condense everything having to do with Rob McKenna picking up Arthur when he was hitchhiking. So you got all of the rain god stuff introduced in a car ride that Arthur didn't need because he was going the wrong way. So he's hitchhiking, he gets in a car or a truck, and he meets Rob McKenna, the rain god. And after hearing everything we need to know about him, he goes, we're actually going the wrong way. Can you just let me out here? And so then he gets out of McKenna's truck, and that's when he gets picked up by Russell,
right,
Fenny's brother.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're on the way. And then in the car, when Fenny says this, they cut out two things. One of them kind of important, and the other was your obsession.
Yes.
They did not mention hedgehogs.
Nope.
Or the tweezers.
Right. Well, and I think that's partly because of the time delay between the original writing of the story and the time that this audio play was produced. Because I really think that the monk game with the tweezers was something that was very common back in the day when it was written originally. But even as of today, I wonder whether if I spoke to an older person or spoke to a younger person, I should say, in England, whether they'd ever heard of the term, they'd probably say no. But someone in our generation or older would probably say yes.
It does not surprise me that they cut out the tweezers reference. Right. But Arthur calls back hedgehogs when he's talking to his boss.
Right.
But they didn't put it in here.
Right.
So now when the boss asks, when are you going to be back? And he says something like, when do hedgehogs stop hibernating? It doesn't make any sense.
Except in the sense that it's a random amount of time.
Right. Well, yeah. But it has a purpose in the book.
Yes, it does. Which is lost here.
And then see if you can reconcile this. We don't do questionable answers for
audio stuff, yeah.
For the audio stuff. So Arthur got in the truck with the rain god.
Mm-hmm.
And drove the wrong way. So he
Right.
got out.
Right.
He immediately got into Russell's car.
Right.
And went the opposite way on the road.
Mm-hmm.
When he got to where he was going to get out, it started raining because the truck went by.
Well, he's on a circular route, right?
Well, yeah.
He dropped off whatever he was having to drop off and turned around and came back, and it only took him 2 minutes.
Right. And he was driving very fast because he's used to driving in the rain.
Right, exactly.
So that ended part 1.
Mm-hmm.
And now we are in part 2.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So Arthur gets dropped off in front of his house, and he tries to get in, and the phone is ringing, and he's delayed by all the junk mail behind the door.
Uh-huh.
And the phone stops ringing as soon as he gets there, just like in the book. During that scene, they reference a kitten.
Right.
That, in the book, is a dead tabby.
Right.
He seemed surprised to see it, like it was not his.
Right.
Like, well, there's a cat.
How'd that get in here?
Yeah. Which is 100% possible.
Right.
Cats will just find a way in, can't find a way out. I thought the inclusion in the book was to reference that time had passed.
Right.
And that Arthur had a cat we didn't know about, and it starved to death. It's a little morbid and really doesn't add to the humor, in my opinion. Right. However, I do not believe it is his cat.
No.
I also have no idea where it came from or why it had to be included. However, there is a reference to him possibly having a dog.
Right.
As he and Ford are being muscled into the airlock of the Vogon ship, Arthur says, in both Primary Phase and in the book, I woke up this morning and thought I'd have a nice relaxed day. Do a bit of reading, brush the dog. Now it's just after 4 in the afternoon and I'm already being thrown out of an alien spaceship 5 light years from the smoking remains of the Earth.
Right.
Did Arthur have a dog? What happened to it? Or is brushing the dog just a euphemism for the way he planned on relaxing?
Oh gosh. The English in the English world do have a tendency to use a lot of euphemisms. So anything is possible.
Because there was no dog. He didn't worry about the dog. He didn't look for his dog, but he talked about his dog immediately after the Earth was destroyed. So,
right. Well, here's a.
I'm
possible...
saying euphemism.
Right. Well, yeah. Obviously, that's a possibility. But what I'm thinking right now is, remember, we're in the multiverse, like you said, and if you're really comfortable in the multiverse, perhaps in this Earth he had a cat.
Go. There we go. Brush the cat.
Because they do say, well, I mean, later on they say in the book or in the audio show here that it is a multiverse, which allows for the concept of duplicate people.
Yes.
And things. So this is a kind of a unique thing, but maybe in this Earth's universe, he had a cat.
Yes. Like I said, every version is a new universe.
Exactly. You're right. I mean, it'd have to be, because this version doesn't fit the other story. It answers questions that the other story produced, but it doesn't fit,
Right on my notes here is the next question that they answered, at least in this universe, which was what was written on Arthur's bowl.
Right.
They have the whole full title, So Long and Thanks for All the Fish. Not just So Long and Thanks, ...
Right. And you're right. And they have that same title on Fenny's bowl.
Do they talk about it?
Yeah, all three of them. Yep, they do. But what I also thought was interesting, and it was one of those questions that we brought up in the last episode, was that when Arthur pulls it out of the box, he says, "Oh, look, a crystal bowl."
Right.
And he, rolls it around in his hand and listens to it, plays with it. And then he says, what am I going to do with it? I know. I'll put my fish in it. Oh, now it's a fish bowl.
Right. Exactly.
So, you and I were debating whether it was intended as a bowl for fish or whether it was a gift and he turned it into a fish bowl. And here they answer it as he turned it into a fish bowl.
Oh, and here's something that I thought when I was thinking back at our conversation about how I called it giving Arthur a symbol of their captivity. And you said, well, they're small, or the fishbowl is small and they wouldn't be kept in, blah, blah. It would be like, hey, you just got out of prison. Here's a little snow globe with Alcatraz in it. No, you're not. I was in San Francisco. I thought you'd like this.
Oh, there you go. Oh, come on. But it's a traditional gift-giving item, a bowl.
A crystal bowl with no designation until a fish is in it is perfect. See, they do fix some things, and then they turn right around,
yes.
And they'll ruin something else in a minute.
Yep. And of course, we haven't gotten there yet, but I do like the fact that they've changed all the gifts. Not all the gifts, but they're in the train station, and she mentions that it's a CD of bagpipe music.
Yes, they do, which is fine. They could just say a recording, and then it will be timeless. But yeah, they do say.
Yes, exactly.
They do say CD.
But I'm sure you have something to say before we get to the train station.
Yeah, right here in my notes, I have that at this point in the book, we read about Ford listening to the speaking clock being broadcast throughout the ship. Mm-hmm. And here we get to listen to him negotiating with the operator to get her to put the call through, rather than listening to him tell the story to Arthur at the end of the book.
Right.
So at the end of the book, he tells Arthur the story. He doesn't have to anymore because we get to hear the story right now.
Right.
So Arthur comes across Fenny after leaving a diner where he met Rob McKenna again, and brings her to the train station like in the book. In the pub near the train station, when Arthur is complaining about the sandwiches, they do a little foreshadowing of the next book.
Yes.
I could make a better sandwich. He kind of throws in there. So I thought that was a little bit funny. A nice little, hey, we know you know what's coming.
Oh, yeah. And they make another little nod to the fact that time has changed here, where they talk about the overabundance of makeover shows.
Yes, that's right.
And they're going to make this cheerfully nautical.
Right. So the same thing that happens in the book happens in the radio series. So after the pub, Arthur's desperate to find Fenchurch, so he goes back to the same trucker diner, and he meets up again with Rob McKenna. Ford is still desperate for sleep, so he uses the guide to send the ship he is on to Earth. Arthur offers the Friends of the Planet person trying to donate to save the dolphins and is very confused. So
Yes,
all that,
yes.
there's very little difference at this point going through. And they introduce Wonko the Sane, John Watson, and he's said to have a bowl just like Arthur.
Right, right. The one thing that I did think was funny, and this they could only do this in the audio show, when Arthur is arguing, well, discussing with the gentleman at the relief agency.
Yeah.
The guy gets more and more frustrated, and in the end, he screams just like Agrajag at Arthur.
Right. Yes.
And then he throws a plaster rhinoceros at
Yes.
Arthur and hits him in the head.
Yeah, he's got a little plaster dust remaining. And again, Arthur does some research, and he learned that there were caves in London, and so he went to where they were, or where they were supposed to be, knocked on a door, and of course, Fenchurch answers. So then we get to part 3, unless you've got anything else about part 2.
No, the only thing I was thinking at the end of part 2, I did think it was kind of funny. They throw in this opportunity to donate to Vogon charity. And if you think you're going to get some money back in taxes, you may as well forget it.
Right, that's right. Yeah, they had the little outros, all the little jokes. So without a party, like in the last phase, to drown out the F word with a sound effect, in this, I really liked it because I was waiting for it. It's like, does he, in a word, or does he, in a nutshell, feel the need to copulate? Like, oh, okay.
I love that. I wrote that down.
Yeah. Fenchurch seemed very nonchalant about giving the guide back to Arthur in this.
Yes.
It seemed to happen way sooner than it did before, and how she could have possibly guessed it was his at this point is beyond me, but she does comment that it says don't panic, which is the why can she read it?
Right.
Because what kind of voodoo is that everybody can read the same message?
Well, the only thing, and again, if you want an answer for that, the only thing I can think of is at this point, Arthur's copy of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is reading to him in English, or displaying to him in English, and maybe there's a setting that sets it that way, or, something like that.
Well, that could be, yes.
So
Yeah.
at that point, that kind of makes sense. And I do like the fact in here, right up here at the beginning, when he's talking to Fenchurch, and Fenchurch is talking about wild revelations, or, how she responds to these things. And he says, does 42 mean anything to you?
Right.
And she
Yeah.
says, no, nothing.
Nothing, no.
Which is what we talked about in our, questions and answers thing. Because she doesn't know the answer, 42.
No. And it didn't mean anything to help her remember what she forgot.
Right, exactly.
But back to the don't panic thing.
Yeah, I've always wondered about that.
But this is another thing that bugged me about this version, because we don't know necessarily why it says don't panic. But Arthur gives Fenchurch an answer that's close to the truth, but not quite.
Right.
He described all the things that has happened to his copy of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, about falling in the crack into, the exploding earth, and just throwing it in the river. And then he said, that is why Don't Panic was written on the cover for, lawsuit reasons. But that's the reason it has a cover.
Right.
They tell us that. They say, your copy of the guide is going to go through this and this and this and this. Therefore, it has a cover that says don't panic. It doesn't say don't panic because it's going to go through all that stuff. That's why it has a cover.
Right.
It says don't panic to calm you down when you're out in the great big wide universe. So
correct.
It's like mixing a metaphor. You're on the right track, but you miss the point. So the new creators of this knew how Douglas Adams never liked to waste a joke. So, since it did not make it into secondary phase, but it was in the book Restaurant at the End of the Universe, he put in the part about how ugly the Vogon ships are, and the only thing uglier is a Vogon. And he now attributed it to Ford Prefect being the author of that entry in the guide. So I thought that was a nice little way of sneaking something in that was from the past that didn't quite make it. And then they jumped to a trial of Vogon Jeltz for not destroying the Earth.
Right.
Since he's not completed the job and he doesn't like to leave things unfinished, and even though the improbability drive makes hyperspace obsolete so the routes don't have to be built, once an order is given, cannot be countermanded.
Right.
And so he's off to finish the job. One problem is the Earth is in a plural zone.
Right.
And those planets are difficult to destroy because they keep coming back.
Right. Very unstable, they say. Yep.
What I liked about that, and this is something that I'm nodding my head to going, I have no idea he couldn't possibly have had this in his head when he was writing this, but ZZ9 is a plural Z. It's always ZZ9 plural Z alpha, which to me was like, that's two, but no, plural doesn't mean two Z's. Like the first ZZ isn't a plural.
Right.
It's just ZZ. It's a designation. It's a, like you were talking about, a graph point.
Right.
Plural is a whole nother designation now for these planets that just keep coming back. Bad penny.
Yep, it exists on a multi-level.
Then, here, this is I think the part that bothered me more than anything. There's a part about luring Zaphod into the total perspective vortex.
Yeah.
And they laugh, saying he's probably still there.
Right. He
went into the vortex in an artificial universe. He did not go into it in this universe.
Right.
Oh, but yes, he did, because this is a totally different universe. He might still be in there.
Right.
We don't know, because this is a totally different universe where all the previous universes seem to not mean anything.
Right.
And then, of course, they have a joke about Vogon's coughing during the proceedings, and the magistrate orders that whoever coughs gets shot. And, of course, at the end, he coughs and gets shot because once an order is made, can't be countermanded.
Yeah, and there's a not a joke made, but a reference made here too about why the Earth would then pop into existence. It says that nature abhors a vacuum. Like that's how it got sucked into the new position, because the destruction of Earth created a vacuum in space.
And Vogon Jeltz said he was going to make it accept a vacuum.
Yeah, exactly. That's the bleeding, bloody mindedness of a Vogon acting up.
Yeah. So in the book, there is that whole part about the Forlornus fire dragons, and we didn't really bring it up because it was mainly jokes, and it wasn't particularly crucial to understanding the story.
Right.
The whole part was to explain that they are aphrodisiacs, and that they were not needed where Arthur and Fenchurch were.
Right.
They included it in the radio series, so they must have found it very important.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I want to mention it here. And the one term that they used that I really liked, that I never thought I would ever read anywhere, is on the planet, everybody would go into the woods and they would be there all night, and then they would come out still claiming to be virgins, if not flushed and sticky virgins. Like, oh, yeah, okay. And I loved the use of fake Dire Straits music.
Yep.
They had a music background that was so reminiscent of Dire Straits without quite being Dire Straits.
I loved it.
And then they did the scene on the plane when Arthur and Fenchurch were doing their flying and they're feeling the need to copulate.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't sound like she's from Boston. Mrs. E. Capelson didn't really have a Boston accent.
No,
so.
not at all.
And they kept in the Ford dream about the new life form that oozed out of the New York's East River.
Right. Which I think was fascinating. And what really made me laugh about this particular scene in the audio version here is, guess who plays the creature?
Who played the creature?
Jackie Mason.
Oh,
the quintessential
yes,
New
that's
Yorker.
right.
I mean, I heard that. I'm like, are you kidding me? Is that really Jackie Mason playing this role? And it was. I mean, that was so awesome. And he is the quintessential New Yorker, and he played that character extremely well.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. So now we get to another part where I think they have what's in the book, and they don't have another idea of what to do, so they just sort of use something in the book that really was totally necessary, and they could have done anything that they wanted because it's an immaterial piece in the radio series. Fenchurch is explaining to Arthur that she found something and lost it, and he lost something and found it. And she wants to find the message that she lost. And as Arthur is calling the tabloid journalist that he knows, she mentions that she's late for her cello lesson and rushes out.
Right.
It's like, cello? The cello wasn't introduced up in the loft and all of that. They found a different way to introduce the hayloft door. They didn't have to do this, I have a cello lesson, and she runs out. So this all of a sudden having her just disappear just seemed a little bit odd. They make their way to California and they meet Wonko the Sane. They discover that he has a bowl like they both do, and he asks if they ever held it to their ear. They did and pinged it, and there was a cacophony of sound followed by it being a message from the campaign to save the humans.
Right.
I doubt that Arthur and Fenchurch understood the message it was giving them.
Yeah, I wondered what they were going to do about that when I heard that's, as I heard that scene coming up on the audio, and I'm like, yeah, that's about right.
Yeah. All right. Everything else with part 3?
When they're talking about, putting your ear up to a glass bowl, that isn't a good idea to put your ear up to every glass bowl. In fact, ones that are designed for bathroom fittings would be frowned upon.
All right, so that brings us to part 4. And I kind of liked the retelling of the far out in the uncharted backwaters portion from the perspective of the dolphins.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Except for the part that implied that Fenchurch, who could not do anything about it, along with the dolphins, also knew that the Earth was doomed. They mentioned that Fenchurch knew that the Earth was doomed. And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, we still don't quite understand the relationship between Fenchurch and the dolphins.
Right.
And I think that's why they added the idea that she was a marine biologist in the earlier part of the audio play here. But you're right.
The narrator mentions that Arthur and Fenchurch are going to search for the message. He also mentioned that Arthur needs to retrieve his babelfish. I wish they would have thrown in something about it multiplying. So now there were 2 of them, or 3 of them, or a bowl full of them. Like they just sort of. So Fenchurch would have one, because right now she's not going to have one. Oh, maybe she doesn't need it.
Well, you imply then that when she gets on that first spaceship, she gets one there.
Oh, that could be. Yeah, she gets one at the airport.
Exactly. You would think they'd have to have one at the spaceport.
Yes. So they do a little more foreshadowing by mentioning reverse temporal engineering.
Right.
And then they have to wait for a coincidence to hitch a lift.
Right.
And Rob McKenna picks him up.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ford Prefect arrives.
Right.
So they listen to the news on McKenna's truck radio and hear a piece by Tricia McMillan. They poke at the TV series when Arthur mentions Trillian is blonde and American.
Right.
So I thought that was kind of funny.
Yep, it was.
The serious cybernetic salesman listening to the speaking clock was on a 5-year mission.
Mm-hmm.
Another little Star Trek crack.
Star Trek crack. Yep, absolutely. He was on a 5-year mission to change everything. Exactly.
Yes. Yes. Oh, some more foreshadowing by mentioning that Tricia has a kid, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
But Ford attributed it to be probably from Zaphod.
Right. And here's an area where you had quite a bit of a question last time, or in the book, where they directly answer it here. And I think they do it primarily because it allows the book to do some narration. And they say that the book knows the address of the message. And they go into quite a bit of detail as to the entry in the book of the address. But what I did find was interesting was they attribute the information for the address to Prax. So
right.
I wonder if the information about the address was added to the book after the existence of Prax, which would have might necessarily have allowed Arthur not to realize that the address information was in the book because he learned it originally from Prax.
Right.
So It was probably like Ford responding or writing up a write-up of his interaction with Prax, which allowed the book to have the address, you know?
But not much else.
Yeah, exactly.
Because when he wrote it, he didn't know what the message was.
He didn't. You're right. But they do go into quite a bit of detail about the land and the area where the message is, and they attribute all that information to the book.
Right. I liked in the book that when Ford was trying to get through the crowd to the spaceship, that he was throwing out caseload of Sony Walkman.
Right.
Earth technology. Mm-hmm. Which was like everybody wanted a Walkman.
Right.
Back then.
Right.
And people would have just been falling all over each other trying to grab one.
Right.
In this, he throws out alien technology.
Right.
Of serious cybernetics phones that are supposed to have naughty ringtones.
Novelty
ringtones.
Naughty novelty ringtones.
Naughty novelty ringtones. But they sound like the complaints department theme song.
What could be naughtier than that?
That's right. So Arthur has come to terms with the Earth existing again by remembering that when Frankie and Benji Mouse were talking, one of them said, if there's any real truth, it's that the entire multi-dimensional infinity of the universe is almost certainly being run by a bunch of maniacs.
Right.
So here's when Arthur goes, oh, multi-dimensional infinity. There, that's your answer.
Well, yeah, I mean, we do know that the mice come from a different dimension, so, you know.
Right.
It fits.
And the multi-dimensions explains why Trillian had a double on Earth, because she was not on it when it was destroyed.
Right.
So the one that when they brought out the new Earth, there was already a Trillian. Don't know why there's not another Arthur running around, but that's an unknowable.
Yeah. Well, again, I the only thing that I can say that kind of mollifies my vision of that is there has to be some point that's the 0 point, you know, because apparently, you know, if Trillian is still on Earth, that means Zaphod didn't visit that dimensional Earth to take her off.
Well,
but why is Arthur there?
foreshadowing
Yeah.
of the next book.
Yeah, exactly.
That's so we don't know anything about that yet,
Mhm.
but
Interesting.
for a little spoiler,
Yeah.
this trillion
Oh, I didn't mean to
did
spoil
not
anything.
go with Zaphod.
Right.
Say that's one of the multi-dimensional infinities.
Right.
In this universe, she didn't. He went with Arthur. Because he was at that party too. So that explains why Arthur's gone and Trillian is there. Because Arthur hooked up with Zaphod at the
other
party. Head. Yes. Man, we are figuring out so much. It sounded like to me at the mountain that Fenchurch confirmed that the message she saw on the mountain was the same one she received in the diner.
Yeah, she clearly says that. She says, yes, that was it. Which,
and I hate that.
I know. I didn't like it either. But, you know, that's what they did here. That particular statement doesn't include, like, actions, or it doesn't make it actionable. It's just an excuse.
Yes, it definitely sounds like an excuse.
Right, because, I mean, her revelation, they clearly say, is much deeper than that in the books. And it allowed her to see into a new existence where everyone lived together happily.
Yeah, and I don't know how that message does that.
It wouldn't.
But different universe. See?
Oh gosh, I don't think that would be an odd universe. That's for sure.
Yeah. So I'm embarrassed to say that my biggest laugh came at the end with Marvin with some new material.
Okay.
I liked that the telescope was coin operated, like in the book. However, nobody had a coin, and they had to use a washer from one of Marvin's arms that fell off when it was removed. Then he only got to the N for inconvenience.
Right.
And the timer ran out, so the telescope went black. If you've ever been to a scenic overlook with those goofy, horrible telescopes, you know that they just turn off.
Right.
So rather than trying to put in another coin, he just wanted to guess. We apologize for the incontinence. Like, no. So they had to take off his other arm and use another washer so he could get the rest of the message.
Exactly.
And then while sitting in the ship that was taking them back to Earth, Fenchurch laughs and asks if Arthur could believe that there was a stall where guys with green wings and orthopedic sandals were renting scooters. Wonko said they ran a concession stand.
Right.
I guess they could have had scooters.
As their concession? Sure, why not?
Yeah. But they asked a different person about scooters, and they said they weren't for the devout.
Right.
So the angels visit Wonko on scooters, so either they have a scooter rental along with the concession stand, or they got the scooters from the other guy.
Yeah, you got it. Well, you know, if they're every 20 walking miles or so, they'd have to have more than just fresh orange juice.
Right. Yes. And then, of course, on the way back to Earth, this did not happen in the book. The ship they are on, that they're going through hyperspace, they come out of hyperspace, and Fenchurch is gone, and Arthur is the only one who remembers her.
Right. Yep, and there's no epilogue in the Quandary Phase audio.
Why did Fenchurch disappear?
Why did Fenchurch disappear? The only thing that I can think of is the dimensional nature of the hyperspace flight. She slipped into another dimension.
Well, I have an answer.
Oh, you have an answer? Well, the only other thing I would posit is that my original position was that Fenchurch and Arthur are from the 00 point in the multiverse, and when they went through, she slipped back to 00, which would have been non-existence for her.
Okay.
What's your answer?
My answer answers a multitude of questions. It answers the question of why Fenchurch got a bowl. It answers the question of why her feet don't touch the ground. It answers the question of why is she so interested in Arthur?
Okay.
And for the answer, you have to go back to part 2 of the radio series.
Okay.
The narrator says this, referring to Arthur. Now he has some calls to make. What he most wants to do is locate and establish contact with Fenny, the disturbed young woman whose brother gave him a lift home last night and who's been exercising his imagination ever since. She doesn't exist for real in the rest of this book. He imagined he saw her. He wanted to find her so badly when he was driving away from the truck diner and had to slam on his brakes because, whoa, why would she be here all by herself standing in the... Because it was his imagination. They new-hearted us.
Oh, I don't. Yeah, I guess they could have, but I don't know. I don't like
It answers every... Why does she not touch the ground? Because she's not real. It's imagination. Why does she like him so much? Because it's his imagination. Why did she get a bowl that says exactly the same thing that he... Because it's his imagination.
All right. Well, the only answer I have to contradict that is, what about Enid from Boston? She saw them. She talked to them on the airplane. She saw them on the wing of the aircraft. Is she imaginary too?
Enid saw something, and Enid never
Well, you're going to make it
says,
work, you know, but I say
Enid
she
never
exists.
says what she saw. She could have just seen Arthur on the wing of the plane. And again, and all Enid says is, do you fly often? There's no thing specifically saying. So, and yes, Ford might have a conversation with her, but that could just been in Arthur's mind as well, because when Arthur realizes that Ford's going to be in his apartment, possibly because of what he heard on the radio in the jarred door, he immediately says something like, go away for a while, go make a run to the store. And like an obedient little girl, boop, 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 she just leaves. So he needed her gone. Poof. She was gone. Goes in, meets Ford.
Oh, yeah.
See, I told you you'd hate that answer.
Well, it doesn't work for me, but if it works for you, well, all the best. All the best
it's
to you.
It's my universe.
More power to you. Yep. You are the reader. You know, you can read it the way you like.
Yes. And we don't have to worry about her in the following book, because she does not make an appearance. They just do a little mention of her that she disappeared, and they blame it on the plural zones. Do they blame it on the plural zones here in this?
In this audio?
Yeah.
No, they don't. But like I said, that makes sense. I mean, it's all part of the bizarreness of the nature. You know, like I said, because we think of her at the 00 point, when she was going through hyperspace, her existence blinked out.
Right.
You know, but how she got out there and didn't go through hyperspace compared to how she got in there and went through hyperspace, yeah, you know, it's story logic. It fits the story, and it fits the world in which Arthur lives. You know, that's just the way it goes.
Well, that brings us to the end of the radio series for So Long and Thanks for All the Fish, which is Quandary Phase. In the Ultimate Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that I have with all 5 books, between So Long and Thanks for All the Fish and Mostly Harmless, there's a little short story called Young Zaphod Plays It Safe. We're going to read and talk about that for our bonus episode coming up in a few weeks.
That'll be fun.
So until then, say goodbye, Brian.
Well, Jeff, all I want to do is say so long, Fenchurch.
You'll live in my imagination forever. Thank you for listening to Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea. Look for us the first Thursday of every month for a full episode. We will also release a bonus episode later in the month. A very special thanks goes out to Luke, Max, Greg, and Tim Lesnick for arranging and performing our opening theme. We would also like to thank our talented friends and family for their voice work on our introductions and commercials. For his portrayal of Marvin, the paranoid android, for this episode's opening, special thanks goes out to Jim Berard, gifter of the books, who also has a brain the size of a planet. A special thanks this episode goes out to Gene Berard for our commercial. Visit our website at digitalwatchesareapretyneatidea.buzzsprout.com, where you can find links to all my Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy inspired t-shirt designs. You can find us on Facebook and YouTube as Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea, on Instagram as Watches Idea Podcast, and on Twitter at Watches Idea. If you'd like to contact us, our email is digitalwatchespodcast@gmail.com.
This has been a Foods for Thought production.